Good morning, Flosstube. It's Cowgirl Kate again. I thought for this video I would kind of go over some of the tricks involved with beading. Hang on, I got the name. I Heart Cross Stitch was mentioning in one of her videos about the Spring Queen by Mirabilia, and whether or not beads would make a difference and what beads are like to deal with, and is it really worth it to add them or omit them and substitute something else. My own personal opinion, I love beads. I love the dimension and the glitter that they add. I was doing beadwork before I got into cross stitch, so obviously I have a prejudiced vote on adding them, and I a lot of times will add extra ones because, you know, I'm a masochist that way. But there again, it just depends on what your preference is. Some people don't like sewing them on, so they will substitute metallics or cotton floss, or, you know, whatever they want. And, you know, that's one of the beauties of this hobby, is you can do whatever you want. It's your project. It's going to be on your wall or gifted away, or, you know, whatever, but it's your project. You can do whatever you want to it. You know, that's the wonder of it. So, I guess some of the tricks that I'll pass along here, I actually have the Spring Queen project. I dug it out. It was Kirsten's, and what I have here is her UFO. But shall we? We'll have a look-see, and we'll kind of go over some tips and tricks for how to deal with the beading work. Okay? So, sorry if I'm bouncing you guys around. Alright, here is the Spring Queen project. Let me just unfold it here. Sorry for the weird camera angle. And this is what she's got done of it so far. I actually have the same project kitted up exactly because we were going to do a matching set, but I've retired mine and taken all the materials away from it just because hers is more important to me. But here you can see where she does not have the beads on it, but she does have some of these metallics. They're called for in the pattern. I think it's actually the old DMC metallic, which anybody who's ever had to deal with that stuff, I'm just going to say right now, save yourself a ton of headache and get the Petite Treasure braid instead. The color you're going to want for the Petite Treasure braid is PB01, and it'll match. It'll be this bright gold color. The Petite Treasure braid is just 10 times easier to deal with. So you won't be, you know, cussing so much that it's driving you crazy. So here we got. So the point, and I'm showing this ribbon especially. The way that the beads will add dimension is up in here where the ribbon is dark and in shadow. You have the metallics, and they add a little bit of sparkle. And then down here where the light is supposed to hit the design, you can tell it's lighter pink, is where you would add the beads and really give it some pop. I don't have the beads in that color. I went looking through my bead stash last night, and of course the one I wanted to show isn't there, so I'm gonna have to get some beads for it, but I do have some beads for the edges. And in a little bit I'll do a bead demo, I guess, to kind of help people walk through. What I like for beading are these. Get the information there. And I got it from Walmart. You know, it's nothing fancy that I had to go run around to a needlework store or a beadwork store or anything like that. It came from Walmart. I've probably had these spools for, oh, I want to say since 2002. So they last a long time, obviously. You don't need a whole lot. And I like the invisible thread. I like not being able to see see the thread and it has the bead just kind of floating out there in space. I like that effect, so that's what I use. But I've learned a few tricks on how to deal with this stuff, so I'll pass those on in a little bit. The other trick that I'm gonna show you guys is if the invisible beading thread is absolutely driving you crazy and you don't want to deal with it, there is this stuff. It's called Nymo and it's size D, and I get it in gray. And the reason for that is back when I was doing a lot of bead work, especially if you're doing loom work, the thread will show at the edges of your project, and that always irritated me, because if you had some dark beads and some light beads together in the pattern, you would see either dark or light threads. And that always bugged me. You know, you kind of want to avoid that. And it's the same with, you know, cross stitch. Some people use a matching thread to their fabric. Some people use a matching thread to the bead. But it's kind of the end goal is the same. They want to hide the way the bead is attached, you know, if that's what their preference is. This stuff is very thin, it's very strong, it's a lot easier to deal with than the invisible thread, I'll admit that much. I got it in gray because unless you're working on like a black or, you know, even a navy fabric, the gray is going to pretty much disappear. You know, the human eye is kind of trained to pick out what is different in something when it's looking at an object. And say you're using, you know, white threads to anchor your beads down, and the beads are dark and your fabric is dark, or your fabric is neutral and the beads are dark, you know, the white thread is you're going to see little bits of it. I mean, it's just the way the human eye is. With this stuff, eyes can't pick up on the gray as much as they can either black or white, and so it just kind of fades into the background a lot better. So that is what I favored for my beadwork, and so if I ever get sick of the invisible thread, I would just use this instead, because I have tried it on like Christmas ornaments, just because I, you know, wasn't sure who was going to be handling the ornament and I wanted something a little stronger. So I used this rather than the invisible thread, which is gonna, you know, just, you know, the project's going on a wall. This stuff I think is a little tougher, you know, it can be manhandled a bit more. So, you know, I have tried it on needlework, and the gray fades a lot better than either the black or the white. So that's my little trick if you don't care for the invisible thread. So anyway, down into Spring Queen and a beading demo. Now I've already got my needle anchored in, and what I did, I'm hoping my camera will pick up the invisible thread here. See if I can find it. Okay, it's right here. What I did was I ran the needle underneath some of the floss on the back, and I knotted it 2 or 3 times. Make sure it's in there good and tight and it's not going to slide around. You know, this will keep your first bead anchored. That sucker's not going anywhere after you get it sewn on. So that's that on the front, or the back, I'm sorry. And then I have also, let me get it here. It's probably not going to focus this on such a tiny thing. But I have also knotted it several times around the eye of the needle. And this thread is so thin that it's not going to matter. The knots are not going to be that big. It's going to pass through a bead. Your beads, if they do get stuck, are more likely to get stuck on the needle itself rather than the little knots that this thread will make. So it's really not anything too scary to knot it to the end. But having it that way, you're going to take a lot of the headache away from your needle falling off, or the thread slipping around. It's just one ply of thread, and that's plenty strong enough to hold them. So there you go. That's my little tricks for anchoring invisible beading thread to make it a little easier to deal with. And I'm just going to set the camera over here, and hopefully this will work. I'll try to keep it where you can see what's going on. And I'll throw a few beads in so that you can see kind of for yourself what all the dimensions are different. I don't have it on a hoop, and normally I would, or a Q-snap or something, but I wasn't going to deal with that. So I'm just going to throw a bead on here. And I use a full cross to attach my beads. Some people do a half, and they, you know, sit at a slant like that. This is a half cross. So it's going to sit at a slant. Let's see how close I can get it up there. And then to go in and actually make it a full cross, it's going to lay horizontally, which is the effect that I like. And that's just personal preference. And I like knowing that it's got a full cross on there to hold it down real secure. Okay. And that is it. With a full cross, and you can kind of see it just adds a little, it catches the light and it draws your eye to whatever area of the pattern. I wish I was faster at this, but without my hoop I'm kind of out of my element here. But just gonna scoop one up. Another trick is I have my little dishes for the beads, and I just pour a few out, and then rather than picking them up with my left hand and threading them onto the needle, I'll just scoop it. It goes a lot faster, and you know, usually my other hand is busy anyway holding on to the fabric or the hoop, unless I got it in the big Q snaps, and then it just sits on a stand. But let me show you here how to scoop them up. That's all it is. You know, not rocket science or anything, but it saves a lot of trouble, because you don't need that other hand to fiddle around with it, and you know, it just goes a lot faster. And for a lot of people, you know, needlework actually does make its own set of problems with, you know, carpal tunnel and arthritis and such like that. So, you know, the idea of picking up a bead can be painful for some people, and, you know, there again, you know, this will help. You're not at least using both your hands. You know, you can let one have a rest by using a dish. So let me just pull it in here. I've only attached 3 beads, but you can kind of see they just kind of draw your eye in. They give a little bit of extra shine. I think they're worth it, but that's my personal opinion, and you know, whatever, to each their own. But it kind of gives you an idea. You know, down here it doesn't have any, and you could fill that in with a purpley kind of metallic or gold, or you know, whatever you wanted. I just have a thing for beads to start with, so I always put extra on, actually. But that is the Mirabilia Spring Queen that I Heart Cross Stitch was kind of wondering about, and you know, anybody else too. You know, if you're wondering, you know, about the beads versus not, you know, well, there's a tiny little example. I wish I was faster at it, but there's an idea of what they add to what she looks like versus, you know, without. So hopefully that kind of answers a few of your questions or concerns, or at least gets you thinking on, do I really want to deal with that? It seems like a lot of work. You know, is it worth it? Or, you know, maybe if I have a few tricks, it'll go easier for me, or maybe I'll just decide that, yeah, screw this. I'm not going to deal with, you know, such fiddly little things. I'm just going to turn these around here. So anyway, other than that, I'm hoping that it's kind of eased some of your anxieties or whatever about the beadwork on a Mirabilia, you know, in case anybody's wondering, besides I Heart Cross Stitch. Beads aren't scary, you know, just because you haven't done them before. They're not scary. Not by any means. Probably the only scary thing is spilling them all and having to pick them up. Other than that, they're just little, you know, sparkles and stuff. That's it. You know, they're not that hard to deal with. It just, like anything, you just got to find your groove. I used to sell a lot of beadwork, a lot of jewelry. This is actually one of them that I kept. So, I mean, there's so many ways around it, so many ways to play with it, that, you know, attaching them to needlework is pretty much, if you can sew a button, you can sew a bead on. I mean, it's very simple. It just takes time. So, excuse me, I'm just going to grab a drink here. Excuse me. I also want to thank everybody who's been giving me a shout out. You know, that's just wonderful. You know, thank you. You know, it's very kind of you guys to do that. I'm still kind of running around on YouTube trying to find everybody and, you know, subscribe to people. The whole Flosstube thing in the title of the videos has been a great help, because then I know exactly what I'm looking for, and the search part of YouTube will pick it up and, you know, kind of direct me around. So I really appreciate y'all that are putting that in your titles of your video. And I'd also, because people have been kind enough to do it for me, I'd like to pass it on to a few other new YouTubers that I've discovered in all my wanderings around. And they are Welch Stitcher. She's got a really cool video on a Mirabilia finish that she's had. So go check her out. Excuse me. There's also Stitchy Ryan, who's a new YouTuber, and he's working on a bunch of Disney scenery, I think by Thomas Kincaid. Anyway, I never knew that they even existed until I seen his videos, and oh, they're beautiful designs, so it'll be fun to watch as he, you know, works through those. And another one is Jessica Henderson. She's new to the world of cross stitch, and she's got a lot of cool projects lined up, so yeah, go check those guys out. Once again, I want to thank you all for watching.